Chapter 70. Ambrosia. Alice worked tirelessly in her underground laboratory. A long time, thoughts of hers finally taking shape into reality. All the ideas of how to extend a life, be it for the purposes of torture or simply for survival. How to remove mutations from the body, how to improve the system without interfering with the parts. To start, it could not be stopped, not entirely. Aging was something that could and would occur, but it could be slowed if the right defects and mutations were targeted. What's more, the division of cells was something, but not her true goal. She needed magic to heal not just the body, but the mind. Any injury needed to be a trigger. The magic would immediately respond with healing magic or assist the natural process of the body. The problem with humans was their bodies did not easily hold magic. Something would easily need to be added that would hold magic and use it should the body detect damage. Further, it could not be flushed out of the body through digestion or work against the immune system. For her prototype, she had a simple gem that could be merged with the nervous system, detecting damage and reacting accordingly. But it wasn't enough. That was too simple. She needed more than that. She needed something that flowed within the bodies, that stretched throughout the blood and immune system. Small particles of powerful gem made from the very dust of the oculus. Magic-filled gems that slowly filled themselves over time using the human body, taking what magic that ordinarily would have gone to waste. As it happened, magic moves regularly through all things. If she could master collecting it and harnessing it, it would be enough. She tested her theory on herself, sometimes injuring her own body to see how fast her prototype would react. The cuts healed, but she always found herself dissatisfied, pretending her father or Darius demanding her to improve it, constantly working in a mania without food or sleep. For 4 days she worked, ignoring the food they offered her. The very whole of her body went into shock. She passed out during her work, falling onto the oculus itself, which seemed to warm her with a subtle magical glow. In her coma, some came to her rescue, offering her water and some sustenance, hoping she would sleep. She did sleep, an hour or two, only then to wake up wide-eyed, continuing her mania. When she woke up, she let out a yell of victory and began furiously working on her experiment. Fear crawled up those who watched. The gleam in her eye finally satisfied. In her hand was a vial, one she put in a syringe with a sizable needle. She, in her half-sleep state, walked with what seemed to be a glowing yellow liquid. She named her vial Ambrosia. Wearing nothing but her pajama pants and a lab coat, she walked upstairs. Those who got in her way were viciously attacked until they stood aside. She traveled out of her basement, ignoring the nearly naked girl who went straight for Darius's room. She had to ignore staff, soldiers who wondered if they were hallucinating. The door to Darius's room was thoroughly locked, of course. She banged her entire arm against the door once. "I can save him!" she yelled in a frenzy. Isla Gaust answered the door, but was promptly thrown out of the way of the unconscious Darius, who was still in the slow process of death. Their attempts to cure him were not a matter of dealing with nephelite. It was simply too much damage had been done. It was uncertain he would ever recover. Augustana raised herself from the chair, gripping her weapon, pointing it at what seemed to be her like some non-human soul. Paladins could have a loose sense of the spirit of the person they looked upon. Shocked at what she saw, for Alice she saw nothing. Alice Gaust was a trance-like mania. "Step away from him!" she yelled, ready to strike down the girl, keeping a blade between Darius and the crazed blonde. Alice kept walking, ignoring the threat. Augustana was not bluffing. She would cut her without question. But Alice raced forward through the blade, causing her stomach and side to be cut deeply. Augustana was surprised to see Alice did not even react. She ignored the pain and rushed forward, still cutting open her side as she kept walking despite the blade in her. Augustana was shocked as the girl plunged through the blade and spilled large amounts of blood and exposed muscle and even organs. She walked, still smiling wildly. "I will not allow you to die, Darius Orn. I'll drag you back from hell if I must. Taste ambrosia." She plunged the yellow-colored liquid into him, the syringe going right through the ribs and into the heart. She pressed down hard on the liquid-filled syringe, ignoring the fact she was dying from blood loss or what others tried to pull her away. The moment she finished her task, she coughed and let out a quick yell of victory before she started to change. Augustana and Isla looked with horror as Alice bled on the floor and managed to fight back men stronger than her trying to pull her away. She heaved and her eyes were colorless and distant. Not even a drop of yellow liquid remained in the syringe. She did not pull the syringe out. Whatever monstrous strength she had left her. She did not have the strength to even stand. It was as if all of it suddenly vanished. Her wound suddenly felt real. She fell to the floor and passed out with her eyes open, losing herself to sleep and fatigue. Isla, in a panic, began to heal her sister from the wound. Augustana stood in disbelief. Never had she seen anything like this. Isla, in her panic, begged Augustana to help. Augustana nodded, both already tired from Darius. They used magic as others attempted to give her water and patch her up. They ignored for a time the shaking of Darius. A yell came from the man, and it sounded like a sound men were not meant to make. Not one of pain, but of one who was rejecting death itself. Darius flung himself up from the bed, gasping for air as he felt his body reconstructing the damage at rapid pace. Painful as it was, he did not yell a second time. His yellow eyes flashed with intense brightness not seen before turning his head. At last, his blurred vision came into focus. His eyes dilated far beyond normal, his eyes shifting into a gold color as he made sense of the waking world. A needle, in his heart. He pulled it out and was surprised to see the wound very quickly closed up. Alice lay on the ground, bleeding. Augustana looked at her with complete disbelief. Alice lay there, bleeding out with her life in very real danger. She looked like she ran through a sword to get to him. Why would someone run through a sword? At a glance, she was in a fatigued and weakened state. Out of instinct, she dropped to her knees and tried to heal her sister. Isla healed as best she could before her head turned around. Isla felt tears well up. Darius? He cast aside his bed coverings. The sores and boils on his body rapidly began healing themselves in a slow-to-the-eye but noticeable speed. He raised himself with a groan, almost stumbling as he came to a stand. The near instant result was impossible. Where was he? How long was he out? Even the best of healing magics often took time. He looked to see Alice on the floor. He blinked, gaining some sense of the situation. He didn't know why this was happening, but it didn't matter. Cover her up and get her downstairs. Don't let people see her. How long was I out? Despite what should have been a fatal wound, Alice was far easier to heal than Darius was. She would survive. And what's more, it seemed her own wounds healed. Her experiments on herself confused the healers. Her sister slowly realized she was experimenting on herself, going so far as to stab herself just to see what it would do. Freshly healed tissue left marks. Further, one could tell when healing magic was used. It seems she had some remnants of potent magic stored up in her body to be used when wounded. The recap of events was told to Darius. It had been about 6 days. They managed to remove the nephrite little by little, but the damage to his body was substantial. Alice did something although they tried to stop her. She was in some sort of crazed mania for days, they learned later. Darius considered the situation, but would have to question her on it later. He learned Scipio had somewhat taken a stand and took over, but he would need help. There were many men that were sick. What sickened Darius was that their best card against it was on the floor unconscious. Considering her wound, this could be a setback. He needed to make an appearance. There was much he had to do. For starters, he would need to focus the most urgent matter and work towards the less urgent. Meredith, we need Meredith. Where is he? Meredith was out cold, sick and dying. Although they were taking steps to remove the nephrite from his body, his health was in question. The staff in his hand was still in his room. None knew what it was. No, perhaps they simply couldn't take it from him. She must have given Meredith permission to use it. Any who tried to touch it found their hands shattered by some sort of repelling force. Darius was relieved the staff never left his hand. Thank you. Thank you. He wasn't even sure who he was thanking. Hyacinthe was dead, and Marius couldn't hear him, and the gods he felt like had no part in this. But still, he was truly relieved. They did it. Hyacinthe was dead, and they had her staff. The secret to draining bodies of magic could no doubt be found within it. He made his way to Meredith, not bothered to throw a set on clothes. He moved to the room where Meredith lay. Darius gave him a shake. Meredith! Meredith, can you hear me? The doctors advised their superior not to shake him like that. Be damned, all of them. But Meredith slowly opened an eye, half a smile and his messy hair covering most of his face. You look like bloody hell, he said weakly in a half-joking manner. Darius knew time was precious. Meredith, pay attention to me. Pay very close attention to me. I need you to take the staff in your hand. With Hyacinthe gone, surely only you can do this. I need you to give me permission to use it. Stay awake, Meredith. Stay awake long enough for this, and I'll let you sleep for 7 days. I'll watch over you, but you must do this. The true goal of the Oculus was to be a place to hold magic. If more needed to be made, it would be possible. Alice didn't really explain her work when she drove some miracle drug right into Darius's heart. It might have been the care he was receiving before, or the fact that constant work was being done to extend its life, but it seemed like Alice drained what little they had in the oculus stored up. There was no magic inside it. Essentially an empty battery, and it was in front of this empty battery that many gathered. The witches were brought out in their prisons, each shaken from sleep. Alyssa and Abigail were before them, still trapped in those strange metal bird cages. They did not know what to make of their current situation. Meredith entered by being carried. In his hand was the staff of Hecate. Any witch would recognize it. That staff. Abigail began looking at it, almost shaking in awe of it. Alyssa did not want to believe it. How? What did you offer her? Of course it made sense now. Hecate didn't lift a finger to help them. They now had her staff. They must have made some sort of deal with them. The mortals were a little too well prepared. Hecate betrayed them. What did you offer her to gain something like that? It never occurred to them that she could die. Hecate was a goddess. Killing her was beyond wildest speculation. Darius said calmly, Hecate is dead. We seek to test the limits of the staff. She called it our salvation. From what he heard from the observatory, the staff could be used to drain witches of their magic. Not just one. It could drain all who made a bond with Hecate. Changelings and witches alike. Not just anyone could use it either. Only Hecate or those who had been marked by her. Further, only those who had permission to use it, willingly given to them. Meredith met all the credentials. She had willingly given it to him. Cursing him as a witch before offering him a blessing. The salvation of the world. Yes, that's more or less what it would be. There was no telling how much time this would buy them. Darius looked to Meredith, who did not look to be doing well. Meredith, we need to find a way for you to let me use the staff. I fear you're not well enough as you are, or I'd let you do it. I'm going to try to put as much magic as I can into this oculus. Meredith looked at it with disbelief. He looked at the witches in their cages. Augustana seemed to barely believe it herself. When did he make such a thing? How could he make such a thing? This was beyond him, beyond any of them. It looked almost like the observatory crystal. But it had flaws, and it was made well for the haste it must have taken to make it. It occurred to Augustana that she had never seen that tiny blonde girl that was willing to rush through a blade in order to save Darius. Augustana began to ask a very important question. Colonel, who is that girl that saved your life? Did she make this? Darius looked around those who he trusted. Her name is Alice Goust. She is the one who made this. For her protection, for her sister's protection, and even my own, I have been keeping her secret. It cannot be overstated how important it is you keep her identity secret. Should anyone learn of her? Augustana understood, or at least she thought she did. If anyone knew of her, they would take her from you. I understand. But even you must realize she has created things not known to science or magic. Darius already knew. Alice has the potential to rapidly expand any field of science or magic, yes. There is no explanation for her unusual abilities, but she is mad, difficult to control. He leaned to Augustana, speaking softly. It is almost certain that she killed her parents, or worse. Augustana nodded, but shifted focus to Meredith, who had trouble staying awake. She pet his head and tried to run a little healing into him. It barely seemed to have any effect, but Meredith managed to hand the staff to Darius. Use it. I don't know words or magic, but use it. Darius reluctantly took it. At the moment it did not seem like it rejected him, for if the staff did what it did before, even with armor and black steel, that would not be enough to save him. For the moment he could hold it. He placed the staff against the oculus and shut his eyes. Gather what stems you can. We will need them. We need as many as can be spared. I have bought some, but I doubt it will be enough. Scipio had already, according to Darius's wishes, been gathering quite a few gems, making payments on large orders of gems. In fact, no one could have guessed that they would kill Hecate. In the eyes of Colonel Orne, it would not have mattered if they pre-ordered a bunch of gems in the event of their success. For if they failed, it would not matter. They would be dead, and it would be someone else's problem to worry about paying bills on a bunch of ordered gems. But they had succeeded, and there was a great gathering of gems being bought. Not all of them from reputable sources. Gems were dumped, only to be transported by those trusted enough to work in the lower levels. Piles of valuable jewels were dumped near the oculus. Their quality hardly inspected. Only their ability to hold magic mattered. Darius was no magus, but even he had to sigh when he realized there was no way they gathered enough gems. No matter, he had to work with what he had. His target was witches. After that, he would target magical creatures or anything that had a bond with Hikatai, anything whose magic would add to hers when they died. Hikatai could at any time draw from the near limitless amounts of magic that her coven had. Not just that, anything that served her. With her staff she drained them. If she wanted to, she could kill them. Darius intended to do just that. He was going to kill them all. This device he made was modeled after the giant gem of the observatory. In terms of size it was larger, but he doubted it would be as efficient. Still, he hoped it could hold some fraction of the power that was in that observatory. Earlier, they managed to link this gem to the observatory, although all they could send was data. Sai entered at last, dealing with all sorts of paperwork and finalizing what deals he could until now. "Darius, you're awake! Are you all right?" It was about time. He asked Sai to do him a favor. "I need you to try and send a message to the observer. Ask him if he'd be ready to receive excess magic through the oculus." Sai nodded and put his hand on the gem, only then to mouth words. After a moment of silence, his presence seemed to shoot out through the gem into the observatory, granting him access to speak to the observer. "You've been cleared. How can I help you?" a child's voice replied. Sai relayed the message Darius asked him to send. "Going to have a lot of magic here. Is there any way to transfer the access to the observatory? We don't want to overload it." The observer responded easily. "Of course. It will take 20 seconds to prepare, at which point you may begin at any point you choose." Of course they were not going to be ready in 20 seconds, but at least they had time to prepare the gems being piled up against the oculus. The amount of magic a single gem could hold was staggering, but even with this, he feared this would not be enough. He would only get the chance to do this once. The longer he waited, the more he ran a risk of the witches severing their bond with their dead goddess. How long until they found out? Had they already found out? No, she died in Black Maw and was ignoring their prayers for some time. They still might be loyal to her, although infighting would increase the longer they waited. When they were ready, it was time to begin. "Everyone brace yourselves. I'm about to start." He went over the necessary incantations and wished he could have someone else do it, but if anyone was magically inclined, it was likely the staff might kill them. Darius decided if anyone would risk their lives on this, it would be his. Should he die? The work he sought out to do would be done. Just as with Hikatai, he had died there, he still would have extended the life of an ungrateful world. His focus went into the staff and he reached out to the world. It was marvelous having the staff of a goddess and feeling the great multitude of servants she had. It wasn't just witches. There were magical beasts, humans, and other things. If he focused hard enough, he could even feel Meridus. Darius grit his teeth, hoping for the best. He realized he even was gambling with Meridus's life as well. He too was bonded, making it possible for him to die if used incorrectly. Darius did not have the control he wished he had, but he believed he could start with the witches. He put everything he had to command the staff to begin draining the witches of their magics and their very lives. The power of the staff could not be denied, even by powerful witches. It began. The witches toiled and labored against the earth. There were less mouths to feed, but they still had to make do with the fact that the vast majority of their leadership was gone. Witches even now argued with one another who should take command. Factions were starting to form. News of Hecate's death had not yet reached them. Some had already cut their bonds with Hecate. Oftentimes it would mean the loyalists would kill a witch that crossed that line. Others kept their severed bond a secret. Then all at once it came upon them. Like a sudden shadow of night, they looked up and felt the power of Hecate. They felt the Witch Queen's power flow through them. Their goddess was at last making her presence known. Their bonds ignited with power, and some were proud that they were so loyal. Surely Hecate would return and smite those who did not trust in the power of the goddess. Then horror struck them. Their magic within them began to churn. What had they done? Had they upset the goddess? Had they not been loyal? No, this was something else. It was the goddess and her power for certain, but something felt off. It did not belong to her. The confusion was soon met with pain as their souls began to cry out. Their magic in their bodies began to turn against them, commanding their own magic to kill them. They cried out to a goddess who could not hear them. Some fell and writhed. Pain soon sifted to the threat of death. Their magic had always been their own, was turning against itself, causing their insides to burn with power. Strange colored flames shot out of them. Their cries soon fell to silence as they hit the floor. Their bodies hit the ground. They burned with multicolored flames and smoke. Then the fires gathered into a white stream, which did not flow as much as sprayed away at such speeds that it could barely be said to have happened. Energy of the witches from all over the world was being taken from them. The weakest were the first to die. Then the strong started to fall. The more magic they had, the more it took from them. Even Hecate's own corpse, which had been collected and placed in a cell within the compound, started to burn. Alyssa yelled out in pain. The black cage did not protect her from this. Her own body was being destroyed. Abigail screamed as she watched what her only companion burn to death in strange flames. Was she next? What was this? Darius grit his teeth and knew this was more magic than he could prepare for. The gem started to fill and fill and fill, and just by holding the staff his body seemed to scream at the overload of magic. He pressed on, pushing as much as he could into the gem. He needed to kill them, all of them, dead to the last witch and man. He pushed on. The stronger of the witches cried out. Their familiars let out yells and started to burn and add their energy to the endless flow of power heading to a singular point in the world. The strongest of witches attempted to sever their bonds, but often it was too late. They lacked the strength. It was no easy task to sever the bond with Hecate. Even with her dead and gone, it was no easy spell to remove. The stronger witches began to die the same as those before them. Their familiars and even important servants were not safe from the growing fire. The observer's voice rang through Darius's mind. Assisting in giving the magic course. You may continue. Darius pushed forward, taking another step and pressing the staff hard against the titanic-sized diamond. He gripped Meredith and tried to share some of the magic in case he was made a target. He passed out and did not awaken, but he was not dead. He had to keep going. Next came the strongest of witches. They put up a fight as would be expected. Some had already cut their ties. Those that had not had to pay the price. The magic in their bodies began to rebel, and those with control of themselves fought against it. Having some prepared method, some launched out massive portions of their magic from their bodies willingly, giving up vast amounts of their power, but to save their lives. Others tried to hold it and keep it only to burn and die. Familiars and tree spirits started to burn. Animals in the woods started to burn, their power adding to the flow. Already the giant diamond was full, but he wasn't done. There was still so much left. The small diamonds began to soak up some of the magic, but there weren't nearly enough. He kept going, even if capturing the stray magic didn't work. He'd have to kill as many as he could. The world's life was extended for each one that died. Each one was a caster who died. The magic in their bodies would do nothing else, be free to roam the world. Next came a vast number of changelings and magical creatures, even elves and dwarves that had been marked by her over thousands of years. They began to burn in multicolored flames, crying their last as their power started adding to the growing stream of color that could be followed. Dragons looked up to the sky. Elves gasped in wonder as they could see a flow of energy in the sky. Dwarves looked, and many looked at it through a scope. Mages around the world observed the phenomenon. The flow could not be explained, despite the scrambling observers' questions. No theory came. The best guess, if any, was that it seemed to be a work of a god to them. Was a god leaving the plane? Was the world changing? The gems overflowed, and Darius didn't have anywhere else for it to go. He very well could die from being overloaded by magic. He was no god. He could not hold that amount of magic. In truth, neither could Hecate. This would have been too much for even her. The observer spoke up. Redirecting magic away from your location, creating a link to the observatory. Temporary permissions granted to allow magic to flow to enter. Magic from the gems started to drain. The oculus started to rapidly lose magic. Only fast enough to keep it from cracking or exploding. Darius shoved as much as he could into it, but it was just too much. Changelings, good or evil, started to burn in flames. Animals and all things bound to the goddess began to join the flow of light. A hand came to the staff, and Meredith began to take over where Darius started to lose strength. He pushed as much as he could through the stream made by the observatory. Darius fell and left Meredith holding the staff for as long as he could. Augustana put her hand on his shoulder, quickly finding it was way too much magic for her to handle. Then Sai, who then let out a yell and fell to the ground. Others reached over in an attempt to soak up what little of the magic they could to buy a little more time. Augustana stood and prayed to stay up. They simply did not have enough capacity. Then Meredith got an idea. He needed to waste the magic. If they had too much, the fastest way was to cast spells. Spells they might think near impossible. He focused on the nearby lakes and the mountains and commanded the water to be purified. He commanded the forest to be removed of corruption. He wasn't even sure he was doing it right. Just anything he could find to use magic on that even seemed somewhat productive. Then he looked to the house and grabbed Augustana. Try healing the injured. She didn't understand at first until she felt the massive power. It did not matter if she succeeded in doing so correctly. She hurriedly launched massive healing magic erupting from the world itself, spraying it through the complex. She did it over and over again, wasting as much magic as she could. Meredith didn't even know magic, but wasting on anything was the best idea he could think of. Isla joined them, spraying healing spells across great distances, refining their work as best she could. It may have caused more harm than good in some cases without correct technique. She targeted anywhere and everywhere she could think of. With the staff and the oculus, they could use the flow of energy in the sky to cast magic pretty much anywhere they needed. It wasn't that they could use all of it, it was simply they were buying the observer time to soak it up as best he could. And from what they could tell, it was working. It started to slow at last, each of them exhausting themselves, casting blessings or healing wherever they may. They healed the moon and sun elves that they could find that had camps injured. Meredith was no mage, but seemed to have the most control over the direction of the flow. The lady seemed to be able to shift it into usable spells, commanding it to change shape and to reformat into light-based magic. Sai, who barely stayed away, grabbed Meredith's leg and began to assist in controlling it as best he could, letting his will mix into those touching him. Isla and Augustana even had their best to heal Meredith, pressing up bits of nephelite if they could, or simply overpowering it until they could heal spots they couldn't before. Then it was over. The flow slowed to a small, steady stream, one the observer could handle. Some of the magic collected will be returned to the world. All storage available here has been filled. Please return to the observatory at your next convenience. The voice went silent, and the staff looked so tired from being overworked. Their spirits were like wood that simply had burned for too long. Souls were charred and black. Meredith felt like crap, but better than he had felt for a long time. They did it. The vast majority of witches were dead. Their familiars were dead. Humans, changelings, and elves who bonded themselves with Hecate were dead. Alyssa was dead. Nothing but ash. She served no great purpose but as a visual for what happened to other witches. Abigail yet lived, proving witches that did not accept the mark of Hecate did not die. Perhaps it was because Hecate bargained with her for her safety, her protection. Even after death, which bargains or curses could come true? Everyone was silent and fell to the ground.